I am not a clearing agent, President Akufo-Addo declares as he fends off NDC's tag while defending his anti-corruption credentials.
There are some who refuse to accept my method of proceeding and have characterized me as a clearing agent. Because for them, the mere allegation without more is enough to merit condemnation of the public official. It is not my job to clear or convict any person.
This is Top Story with Evans Mensah.
And Top Story is always brought to you by Vodafone. Together we can. The opposition National Democratic Congress (NDC) had persistently branded him a clearing agent in reference to allegations that he simply clears his appointees accused of corruption. Well, it turns out President Akufo-Addo was taking note and has come out tonight fighting back, insisting he is no clearing agent at all. Now, speaking at a national conference on anti-corruption in Accra, President Akufo-Addo said that for many of the allegations of graft against his appointees, no evidence of wrongdoing was established, a reason why state institutions, and not him, cleared them.
There are some who refuse to accept my method of proceeding and have characterized me as a clearing agent. Because for them, the mere allegation without more is enough to merit condemnation of the public official, even though they did not apply this principle when they were in office. Charity, they say, begins at home. And that is why so far, every single alleged act of corruption leveled against any of my appointees has been investigated by independent bodies such as STRAJ, in some cases by Parliament itself. It is not my job to clear or convict any person accused of wrongdoing or of engaging in acts of corruption. That is the job of the courts. My job is to act on allegations of corruption by referring the issue or issues to the proper investigative agencies for the relevant inquiry and necessary action, including, if required, the suspension of the affected official pending the conclusion of investigations. That is exactly what has been done since I assumed the mantle of national leadership on 7th January 2017. Thus it was that in 2019, I suspended the then acting head of the Public Procurement Agency from office after conflict of interest and corruption allegations had been leveled against him. Following recommendations from STRAJ, based on their investigation, I removed him from office in October 2020, and the Office of Special Prosecutor is seized with the matter of prosecution. If an appointee is cleared of any wrongdoing, the evidence adduced and recommendation made by these agencies after the investigations are concluded are what clear the accused persons, not myself. None of these agencies has ever indicated any pressure from the executive over their investigations.
Well, the president was clear. He will not set aside due process in his government fight against corruption either.
For my part, I will not set aside due process in the fight against corruption, no matter how much opprobrium this incurs for me. Ladies and gentlemen, with a clear understanding that corruption thrives in an atmosphere conducive to its concealment, and that access to information is a vital tool in the fight against corruption. My government, in its first term, ensured the passage of the Right of Information Act 2019, Act 989, in order to give true meaning and effect to Article 21, Clause 1, Subclause F of the Constitution. The Act, which successive governments had failed to pass, sees to the implementation of the constitutional right to information held by a public institution to foster a culture of transparency and accountability in public affairs, subject to exemptions necessary and consistent with the protection of the public interest in a democratic society. The Act is being implemented fully now, with the governing board chaired by an experienced retired High Court judge. The Ministry of Information is in the process of training information officers in various ministries, departments, and agencies of government to support the full implementation of the law.
The president took his time to lay out the several interventions his government had undertaken since he was elected in their desire to fight corruption.
In 2018, again during my first term, Parliament passed the Witness Protection Act 2018, Act 975, to which I gave my assent on the 24th of August the same year. The Act established a Witness Protection Agency to establish a witness protection scheme as a vehicle for offering protection to persons who are required to cooperate with law enforcement agencies as witnesses in the investigation and prosecution of cases, particularly corruption cases affecting public officers. Last year, the Criminal Offences Amendment Act 2020, Act 1034, was passed to amend Section 239 of the Criminal Offences Act to categorize the offense of corruption, previously a misdemeanor, as a felony, and to guarantee stiffer punishment of terms of imprisonment of not less than 12 years and not more than 5 years in prison. Other laws passed by my administration and which have enhanced significantly the capacity of the state in the fight against corruption are the Revenue Administration Amendment Act 2020, Act 1029, the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, Act 982, State Interest and Governance Authority Act 2019, Act 990, Anti-Money Laundering Act 2020, Act 1044, the Corporate Restructuring and Insolvency Act 2020, Act 1015, and the Companies Act 2019, Act 992, the Narcotics Control Commission Act 2020, Act 1019, and the Real Estate Agency Act 2020, Act 1047. Administratively, a series of other far-reaching measures have been undertaken by my government to help in the fight against corruption. A memorandum of understanding on information exchange and collaboration in combating corruption and crime in general has been signed by Shraj, EYOCO, Parliament, Office of the Attorney General, Ghana.
Joining me right now on the phone to interrogate what we've just heard a bit more is anti-corruption campaigner Evans Mensah. We'll shortly also hear from the NDC's lawyer and, of course, the Director of Communications there, Communications Officer Sami Jemfi, and the MPP's Communications Director and former Member of Parliament for Adenta will also join us pretty shortly. But Mr. Senator, let me start with you. So the President is right, as you know, when he says that he cannot simply throw in an official simply because he was accused?
Well, yes, I think that we will align with the president's position on that. I believe that at the time when people were talking about the clearinghouse, and indeed it was not just the opposition party for that matter, it was simply because we expected that the institutions of state engaged in investigating would be the ones to give feedback to the public. However, at that point, what would happen was whether it was Yoko or BNI, the reports all seemed to end up in the presidency, and then the president would say there was no finding against them. Thankfully, we have moved beyond that state. I think there was enough commentary, and the president stopped doing that and allowed institutions of state to do that. So really the clearing agent thing is a thing of the past, and that's something we will all accept.
But he raises a point about if you accuse somebody of corruption, produce the evidence. To put it in context, he's not the only president who have said this. Former President Kufuor has famously also made that point. Isn't that what it comes down to? And that there's a lot of perception of corruption, but often the evidence isn't there to back it.
Yes, I think that there was a peculiar situation here where, you see, if the head of Traj or Yoko says we've done this investigation and he presents the report to the public, you have opportunity as journalists, as civil society, to engage, to understand the nature of the investigation and ask follow-up questions to get clarity. However, I mean, at the time, and for me, I'm not quite sure why we're talking about clearing agent at this time, because I think we moved on and we felt that the president had been responsive to the concerns on it. At the time, it was difficult to then validate whether the investigation was done comprehensively or whether the report moving from the security agency that did the investigation to the president had been tampered with. And so if he's saying it's cleared, how do we know for sure? Where is the report? And at that point, the reports were not even being made public. So one could not even cross-check. But thankfully, we've moved beyond that. And I think that nobody disagrees with him that you should give everybody a chance. So if the investigation showed clearly and the public was made had been given access to this report so that we can cross-check and see, yes, there's a proper investigation done and these are the findings and there's nothing questionable, I'm not sure anyone would have had a question or a difficulty with accepting what the president was saying at the time.
So if the president is not the clearing agent, from what he says, almost shifts the burden to the state institutions. There's a case he cites, which I guess illustrates the point. The case of the former PPA, the Public Procurement Authority boss, whose matter was investigated by Straj and subsequently taken up by the special prosecutor. If I'm not mistaken, we're approaching 2 years, and we still don't have closure as far as the prosecution from the special prosecutor's office is concerned. Isn't that part of the problem?
Yes, I think that the clearing agent thing was one. We didn't want our president being the one speaking on matters that specialized investigative entities have worked on. We want to hear from those entities because otherwise it didn't look good. And he moved on from there. Having said that, there is definitely the difficulty where when cases have been investigated and facts put in the public space, then the prosecution and whatever court processes appear not to be happening, and there's no feedback as to has this person been found culpable or not, what is going on next. I think that also contributes to the perception that maybe the government or the president of the day is not doing enough. And so we need to find a way of ensuring that whether it's a fast-track court for corruption or what we do, I think it's something that as a people, we probably need to take a second look at.
You make a very important point. It's a fast-track call for corruption, but isn't that why we did the fast-track agency for dealing with corruption, the special prosecutor?
Yeah, I mean, so there are two arms. There's the investigation and coming up with it, then there's the prosecution, and then you probably need a court that to be seized with the matter and say, look, we are not going to take other issues. We are just focusing on this till we've cleared it. So yes, the Special Prosecutor's Office has been mandated, but if you ask me, one of the things I would have loved to hear the president speak to is the gap that the special prosecutor raised yesterday. That look, I don't have the resources. If he doesn't have the resources, what it means is that he doesn't have the manpower because he doesn't have the capacity to pay them. And if he doesn't have enough manpower, how are we going to ensure that the 31 cases, which probably also includes this case, are going to be speedily dealt with? I think that is one place I would have expected that the president should speak to.
Adamson, and I'm grateful that you joined me. Let me bring in Sammy James Fees with the National Democratic Congress. Mr. Jeffy, thank you for your time. Your top story.
Thanks for having me.
I mean, the NDC has led this charge in tagging the president a clearing agent. Today, he's come out fighting back. He's detailed that he can be the clearing agent. We just heard Edison Anu say, yeah, that has moved on. And that, indeed, you can't disagree with the president, can you, when he says it is the state agencies that do the investigations, he doesn't clear?
Evans, whether or not President Akufo-Addo is a clearing agent of corruption, it's not a matter that lies in his mouth. It has to do with his conduct because, as it is said, actions speak louder than words. And so, what can the good people of Ghana reasonably infer or deduce from the conduct of President Akufo-Addo? That is what matters. It is not about coming out to say, I am not a clearing agent of corruption. It is about what your conduct says. It is about how you handle corruption matters and or corruption scandals and the kind of signal that sends to the populace. And if you look at the countless cases of corruption we have witnessed under President Akufo-Addo and how things have been handled by him, you cannot but come to the conclusion, the inevitable conclusion, that President Nana Addo Dankwa William Akufo-Addo is the chief corruption clearing agent. He is the mother serpent of corruption, as Martin Amidu told us. And he is the biggest enabler and promoter of corruption ever that we have had in this country.
Which specific cases are you referring to?
First of all, let me cite the example you have cited in this interview, the PPA corruption scandal, in which, through the work of ace investigative journalist Manasseh Azuri, the CEO of the Public Procurement Authority was caught on tape as having formed a company that he and his brother-in-law, owned. And he was found to be illegally awarding government contracts to his company, Talent Discovery Limited, and illegally selling these contracts to phony entities without the contracts being executed. Shraj investigated the matter. He was indicted. He was found guilty. In fact, Shraj found that through this illegal business of selling government contracts, he had amassed as much as over 40 million Ghana cedis into his private accounts. Money he could not justify. And to date, this man is still enjoying his loot. President Akufo-Addo has not seen to his prosecution or punishment. And so, how can the president tell us?
But the special prosecutor is investigating that. How can the president do it?
Shraj has already investigated the matter. Shraj's report on this matter is a matter of public record.
Yes.
And in fact, the former special prosecutor who was in office at the time Shraj published his report affirmed Shraj's findings and even said that the money this gentleman had amassed was even more than Shraj had stated in the report.
No, but you're not wrong in stating that Shraj did investigate the matter. But Shraj is not a prosecution agency. There is a special prosecutor who was set up for this.
Why must the special prosecutor be the one prosecuting this case if President Akufo-Addo is interested in fighting corruption?
But why shouldn't
Who is prosecuting Dr. Puni? Who is prosecuting Seydou Agongo? Who is prosecuting Ferdinand Tamaklo? Who is prosecuting Ernest Thompson? Is it not the Attorney General and Minister of Justice appointed by President Akufo-Addo? If his Attorney General and Minister for Justice can prosecute former appointees of the actual NDC regime, why can't they prosecute his own appointees who have been found by independent constitutional or investigative bodies to have engaged in corruption?
Stay with me, Sami Jemfi. Let me bring in your friend, Yababi Asama, who's also a lawyer. In fact, he used to be an anti-corruption head himself as one of the key agencies. Mr. Babi Asama, thank you for joining us. You agree with Sami Jemfi there that indeed, if the president really wanted to fight corruption, some of these cases, the Attorney General was simply taking over?
Evans, you were asking the right questions. I almost laughed when his temperature started going. But you were asking exactly the right questions. You see, corruption is not an event. I have been directly involved in the establishment of the anti-corruption process in Ghana through the Ghana Integrity Initiative, the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, as well as the establishment of the Ghana Action Plan Against Corruption. It's an entire systemic process. NDC will sloganize about mother serpent of corruption, blah, 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 because it sounds interesting and it sounds damning. But they don't have one institutional approach to sell. Go to the manifesto. They talk about the scorpion, the stink. The scorpion, what does it mean? What does it imply? It depends on the president. So you are saying that Nanado personally has to manage all anti-corruption cases. Can we trust John Mahama to do the same, since he's the one they are bringing? But he personally is involved in a lot of matters that are of dubious value. So let us begin to appreciate as a public that anti-corruption, and I am happy you appreciate it, Evans, that it's a process that is based on institutions. So the next step, having established the right institutions, including the internal audit institution, the Office of the Special Prosecutor, the Public Procurement Agency, and all that, let us begin to look at how we share risks amongst them, optimize their advantages, and get them to act independently.
But Mr. Babasama, but why? It appears that, in the suggestion there by somebody, that there's a certain sense in which the president is choosing and picking which ones to leave to the institutions and which ones for his attorney general to do. I mean,
it shouldn't be the president's business to do that. It should be the institution's business to pursue these matters.
Yeah,
that's
but
the difference.
So how is the president deciding when Opuni's case is good for the attorney general and when the former PPA boss case is good for the special prosecutor?
The president has an attorney general by the constitution. The president doesn't decide who gets prosecuted. It is the attorney general's forte, and above all, it is the independent institutions of state, the power, who we should begin questioning about how they determine what to do. If an independent institution of state tells you that I am hobbled by the president, then you have leeway to deal with the president. But you cannot expect the president to be personally micromanaging the anti-corruption portfolio by determining which cases go where.
Mr. Bobby Asama, so Mr. Bobby Asama, just a second. Sami, just a second.
The sting operation is not going anywhere. Where is he rushing to?
Mr. Asama, just the question I have is, it's just going back into history. We have a case where under former President John Mahama, he started a prosecution at the hands of his own attorney general at one of his own appointees in Abuja Pele, right? And you have a case under this current president where his own appointees, including the PPA, goes to or other institutions who are doing it. Why to show the leadership? Why doesn't he allow his attorney general to allow his own attorney to prosecute one of his own?
The president sacked Mr. J. So now Shraj and OSP and IOCO and all those agencies should step up to the plate.
He sacked him, but it wouldn't have carried more weight if he said my attorney general should do the prosecution. Has the
president stopped any of them from acting? You see, you can't depend on an individual. You are talking about President Akufo-Addo. Tomorrow, which president are you going to be talking about? We shouldn't leave this in the hands of presidents. We should build a system that's resilient, that serves us over the long term. And that means that the institutions vested with the authority and power to fight corruption must step up and deal with this canker once and for all, because they have the freedom. They are free to do so, particularly the OSP.
I mean, stay with me.
Why it is the president who must determine who acts on corruption affairs.
I mean, stay with me, but Mr. James, you can't disagree that we must strengthen the institutions and not put this at the doorstep of the president.
My brother, institutions are important in the fight against corruption. But even more important is the political will of the president. The prosecutorial powers of the state are vested in none other than the Attorney General and Minister for Justice, who is an appointee of the president. He is subject to the direction of the president. Okay, so when we are talking about fighting corruption, it's not about signing MOUs and creating institutions and passing laws. It is about the political will to investigate, prosecute those found culpable in acts of corruption and punishing them like President Mahama did in the case of Jida, which you have cited. And I gave you the PP example. The 500 missing excavators scandal is another example. We know that the excavators were stolen. The Minister for Environment himself reported the NPP branch chairman for Central Region to the police. To date, what has become of that matter? What is the Attorney General doing about the 500 missing excavator scandal? We know of the Boss Gate scandal, the 5 million liters of contaminated fuel which was sold in breach of the Public Procurement Law and the NPA Act. We know of the PDS scandal. We know of the Bishu Galamsey Force scandal. We know of the Japa scandal and how President Kufuor pressurized Martin Amidu during the conduct of investigations into that matter, for which reason he has to even resign from office. So clearly, we are talking about a president who specializes in shielding his errant and corrupt officials. That Japa scandal is a classical example of that, and he cannot run away from that. And you know what settles this whole argument is the findings of the Auditor General as captured on page 3, table 2 of the 2020 Auditor General's report, which shows that in 2016, whereas we lost as a country 718 million Ghana cedis to financial irregularities and corruption in the public sector, 718 million lost in 2016. In 2017, we lost 12 billion. In 2020, we lost 12.8 billion to corruption in the public sector alone. In the last 4 years, from 2017 to 2020, under President Kufuor, Ghana has lost a whopping 33 billion Ghana cedis to corruption or financial irregularities in the public sector, according to the Auditor General. That is his record. And that record speaks volumes about his credentials as a chief corruption clearing agent. Even show me one corruption scandal that President Kufuor has allowed investigations to go on and that those found culpable have been punished. Just show me one.
Mr. Bobby Asama, how do you respond to that?
I'm responding by saying that Sami is reinforcing what I'm saying, because it is not President Kufuor who is the corruption fighter. He has established institutions who
was he not the one who promised to protect the public?
Oh, please, let him keep quiet. Let me speak.
With him.
You see, all the things.
Mr. Jemfi, allow him to answer the question for me.
I mean, it's not fun to debate somebody who is precocious.
Mr. Jemfi, allow him to address the question. Yes,
you
please
are
go on.
too precocious. What can you say other than you have said? You said all these things before 2020, and you still lost the election. So why are you rushing to?
Yeah.
Please, relax.
Mr. Jemfi, it's his turn to answer the question, if you may. Allow him to do so. When he was speaking, he was pretty quiet. Yes, Mr. Bami Asamoah.
Yes, Evans, what I'm saying is that what Sami say reinforces the situation that institutions must be in charge. He's sorting out a list of allegations. These are allegations. The president doesn't investigate allegations. The president has established the single most important anti-corruption agency in sub-Saharan Africa, an entirely independent agency, the Office of the Special Prosecutor. The first occupant of that office was an NDC-affiliated person. What more could the president have exhibited by way of political will? And yet, Matiambi, true to his nature, the nature that he used to distance himself from his own party, distanced himself from the powers of his office, and he didn't execute those powers. That institution that Nanado has set up will grow, and it will grow to combat corruption. All the other affiliated institutions need to step. They must come and tell us that President Anado has told them to stop investigating issues. They must come up and tell us that this is where they are, and they receive the call from the president that don't go further. And therefore, it is not enough for the NDC, without a plan against corruption, to come up and spout a list of instances that they assume to be corruption. PDS, administrative issues, and the NDC insists on labeling it corruption. They label everything as corruption. So it's important that it is not left to us, politicians. It's not left to me, Abu Abian Samoa. It's not left to Sami Jemfi to determine what is corruption or not. It is up to the agencies responsible to step up, because that is what we are doing. We are building a state. We are not building a state based is going to leave the scene in 3 years. But anti-corruption will be relevant 10, 20, 40 after Nanado.
Yeah, I mean,
that is how we are building
just a quick final question to you, Sami Jane, for just a second. You talk about institutions taking the mantle. Just yesterday, the special prosecutor, the new one, was complaining that he's not adequately resourced and that what he's asked for, he's not been giving. How can you talk about institutional strength when you have one of your own appointed? Well, it was not even a special prosecutor.
Because you need to look at low-hanging fruits. What is the optimal level of institutional resource? You have Shraj. What is their optimal level of resource? What have they delivered over the years? You have Yoko. What is their optimal level of resource? What have they delivered over the years? Now you have the OSP also complaining independently by himself. The OSP law, I was part of the 7th Parliament which designed that law, and I was very particular about it because of my past experience in anti-corruption. It feeds all the leadership of the other anti-corruption agencies, including the police and the intelligence services, in order to develop a platform for risk sharing. And risk sharing means that you optimize your advantages and you minimize your disadvantages. Are they using it? So there's a point where we have to call on those agencies to justify their existence in terms of low-hanging fruits.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Babian Samoa. Yes, Sami Jemfi, very quickly.
I think it is hypocritical for my brother here to be playing the game he's playing, this attempt to shift responsibility. When President Mahama was in office, they said corruption and the fight against corruption
precocious boy defending a master who is going to fail at the polls.
It is about
Russian
institutions. In any case,
towards nowhere.
Raj has investigated the PPE scandal. They have indicted the former CEO of PPE. What
so they should go ahead.
President who believes in institutions and wants
they should go ahead.
What is
stopping Shraj?
Again, finally, the Constitution has established an institution.
What is stopping Shraj?
To help fight corruption. Well, Shraj that cannot prosecute.
What is stopping Shraj?
Is that of the Attorney General, who is an appointee.
Is the president.
Mr. Babian Samoa, you're doing to him what he said he should stop doing to you.
Yeah. You see, the Constitution has established the office of the Attorney, the Auditor General, okay, to fight corruption in the public sector. You came into office because you didn't like how Yao Domelevo was exposing the gargantuan levels of corruption in your government. You hounded him out of office. Look at the unlawful circumstances that surrounded the dismissal or the removal of Yao Domelevo. And today you want to give us lectures about...
Oh, you have not learned it or Yao Domelevo?
Gentlemen, I'm grateful that you both joined us with your thoughts on this. This corruption matter, I'm pretty sure, ain't going to end. But we heard from the president today fighting back on that, those tagging him as a clearing agent. Sami Jemfi with the NDC, thank you very much. Jabir Sama with the NPP. I'm grateful, both of you, for your time. Ghana Connect starts right now.